Welcome, friends, to this live stream for Empty Cloud, New Jersey. It's good to see some of you have already arrived. Hi, Jayantha, John, Manal, Rebecca, Heike. Good to see you, to know that you're present. Let's begin as usual, friends, by paying homage to our teacher, the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namasami. So, friends, welcome again. We're going to have a conversation today about Kamma, the law of intentional action and its results. And this came up in the last session that I did, and I thought it would be really nice to look at the two suttas in Majjhima Nikaya which deal with the understanding of how this works. And the Buddha gave a very clear exposition on Kamma, and it's really interesting how we can learn from these two suttas. That's Majjhimas 135 and 136, the greater and lesser expositions on Kamma. It's really interesting how we can pick up that if we look in a narrow way at cause and effect, in particularities, particular instances of people doing this and that and seeming to have certain results. So, for instance, somebody who's really awful and cruel and commits a lot of misdeeds can seem to prosper and do really well. And vice versa, someone who's really good and decent and upright can struggle and suffer terribly. And we see this all around us in the world, do we not? When we look at these particular instances, we can actually get quite confused around the laws of Kamma and fall into wrong view. And so to avoid this danger, we really need to take in the teachings on Kamma from the Buddha, who gives us the full picture, how we can make sense of and understand the workings of cause and effect. So first of all, to say, Kamma is intentional activity through speech or thought or deed. So through physical action or what's said or the thoughts that we have. If there's intention behind them for good or for ill, then that will lead to a result. And quite simply put, if wholesome intention is present, the result will be good. The result will be happy. It will lead us in a good way forward to a happy destination. And if a thought, word, or deed is imbued with unwholesome intentionality, then the result will be that of suffering. Unfortunate mind states, unfortunate experiences. And this is the Kamma explained in the most simple way possible. I'd like to begin by looking at Chula Kamma Vibhanga Sutta, the shorter discourse or exposition on Kamma that the Buddha gave, Majjhima 135, to look at more, perhaps in more detail, at this law of cause and effect. So here, there's a student, a Brahmin student called Suba, who approaches the Buddha and asks him the poignant question that people so often ask and get confused around. And the question was, why is it that some people are poor and others are rich? Why are some fortunate and others unfortunate? Why are some beautiful and others ugly? Why are some blessed and others maligned in this lifetime. So this question pointing to the painful inequities that we find all around us, human beings, just focusing on the human realm. Human beings can have the most wonderful or the most dreadful conditions. Why? Why is it that some children are born into poverty? Why is it some people are born with awful health issues? Why is it some people have great misfortunes in their lives, lose their lives? Why is it people struggle and suffer? And on the other hand, there are those who are reaping blessings at every turn. Why? Why is this? And this is a very poignant question. Now, the commentary to this sutta, Majjhima commentary that Atthakatha says, gives a story, a background story to this question, which we can take or leave, but the story is quite interesting. And that is that Suba's father, whose name was Todeya, died, and they had a dog in the household, born into the household a little bit later on, who was digging and unearthing treasures that had been buried by Todeya, who was very miserly and mean in his lifetime. And so the understanding came about that this dog was the rebirth of the father of the household, the patriarch of the household. And whether that's true or not, who knows? But Suba was really troubled by this and came to the Buddha to seek some understanding. How is this possible? Could this be possible? What is the result of our actions? And why is it that some people are fortunate and others are less so? So there's this conversation, which we can be very grateful for, because the Buddha here lays out very simply in a way that we can all understand, and that we all, perhaps in a way, know on some level for ourselves, that this is how it is. Why are some people inferior and some are superior? And the Buddha said to Suba, to begin this explanation, Kamma sayomi, Kamma dayado, Kamma yoni, Kamma bandhu, Kamma patisarana, yang Kamman karisami, kalyanang wapapa kamwa, tasa dayada bhavisami. Beings are the owners of their Kamma. This is a monastic chant. The reason I know it off by heart, something that we chant all the time. And it's an explanation of why things are the way they are, that enables us to develop some degree of equanimity to the world around us, friends. So this explanation is that beings are born of their Kamma, related to their Kamma, bound up by their Kamma. They abide supported by their Kamma. Whatever Kamma, whatever intentional actions, speech, or thoughts one indulges in, of that they will be the heir. So we are nothing really. One could say we are nothing but the product of Kamma. You could say our Kamma, but we could perhaps more generally say Kamma. There is intentionality, there is volitional energy in samsara that is propelling, pushing forward, generating, multiplying existence, multiplying suffering. It is, one could say, the engine of samsara, volitional activity. And we come into existence because of this momentum, this push, this intentionality, and all that happens for all beings everywhere is a result of past Kamma. So there's this rolling on in samsara that is created by intentionality, and we can wisely recognize this and disengage ourselves from this engine, from this production. How do we do that? We let go of intentionality. We let go of volitional activity. We can notice the tendency, the push, and we can sit back and observe these energies, and in doing so we can gain insight, gain wisdom. We can let go of volitional activity. So back to the sutta, having explained quite simply at the beginning to Suba the Buddha saying that we are the owners of Kamma. Kamma is that which is responsible, that is the cause of all of this, of all of these human beings that you see around you with all of these different states of fortune or misfortune. The Buddha goes on to say, well, because Suba asks him particularly about different kinds of people, he responds to each of Suba's questions here. First of all, Suba says, why are some people long-lived and other people die young? What is the reason for that? And the Buddha says, if someone kills, takes life, is merciless, is a murderer, kills for any reason another being with any kind of a hateful or a murderous intention, then the result of this intentionality is that such a person will either, or rather such a deed will either result in an unfortunate rebirth or a short life in the human realm. The result of abstaining from killing, taking life, any kind of murderous or harmful intention in that regard, is that one can experience as a result of that long life, unsullied, unbroken lifespan. Suba asks about why is it that some people are healthy and enjoy good health throughout their lives and others get sick or are in some way disabled, unwell, lacking good health. Why is that? And the Buddha said, when one is given to injuring beings, when one is given to violence, harming, not to the point of killing, but to the point of causing distress to other beings, then the result of that is that one's own physicality or the physicality in future is maligned. It is not as vital as healthy. There is not the same vital energy. On the other hand, if one abstains from any kind of violence or harm, if one is gentle and kindly and views others with compassion, then the result of that is that one has good health. Good health can be experienced as a result of this attitude, of this goodness. If one is of an angry or irritable character, the Buddha says, if one's easily offended, hostile, and irritable and prone to rage, then the result of such behavior and such intentionality is that one is unattractive. Ugliness is the result of irascible intentionality. On the other hand, if there is placid, calm, peaceful, unruffled nature, slow to anger or avoiding anger, the result of that is a beautiful, harmonious features, a pleasant aspect to the appearance of such a person. Doesn't it all make sense, friends, as we go through these? One can see there is a rightness to this. There is a naturalness to this. Of course, we can see even here and now when people are angry and irritable in nature, they tend to have lined and rather disgruntled looking faces. But it's not attractive. Anger is not attractive. Irritability is not attractive. Even here and now, we can see that. Yet one who is of a peaceful nature, will tend to have a smooth, peaceful, pleasant appearance. This is something we can see for now. Also, one who kills or harms others is in danger here and now. They're laying the ground for fear and distress for themselves. It's so clear, really, when we consider this. And those who are peaceful, pacifist, non-harming, gentle and compassionate have less to fear. There's less agitation in the heart. These things are very, in a way, obvious for us. What's important is to, as we'll go on in this conversation, is to remember to avoid the quite ubiquitous tendency to personalize, to particularize, to blame even and judge people for unfortunate conditions in a way that is narrow and ignorant. It's because of, you must be suffering like this because you've done some bad things in the past. That is a very foolish, wrong view. That's not how Kamma works. We have to take the personhood out of the Kamma. And then there's a beautiful, really natural justice and rightness to all that unfolds. So it's difficult with our language, which is so much, in the English language, there's so much like emphasis on the pronouns, the personal. So it's difficult, even as I'm speaking, to convey the impersonal nature of Kamma. So to try and put it more clearly, if there is killing, if there is violence, if there is anger and irritability, the results are short lives, ill health, and ugliness. It's not that a particular person is responsible for these things. It is, there is this field of intentionality which operates in this way with such clarity, with such precision. It's so balanced and perfect in its playing out. These laws of Kamma, there is a naturalness and a beauty in a way to the unfolding of samsara through intentionality. There is justice always. And personally, I find this quite comforting, that we can see all around us things that do not seem to add up, that do not seem to be right. Bad people thriving, wonderful people suffering terribly, doesn't seem right. But when we recognize the laws of Kamma, we can appreciate there is this perfection in a way to the way that things unfold in samsara. So to return to the sutta, the Buddha goes on to speak about those who are envious, resentful and begrudging of the good fortune of others. What happens? What is the result of enviousness and of pulling down and making little of the successes of others instead of rejoicing in the well-being and success of others? What is the result of envy? It is that there is uninfluential a result. So there is a folding in of the influence that such an energy can have in the world. There is a lack of ability to manifest oneself if there's enviousness of another, if I can put it that way. And in the same way, when one rejoices in the good fortune of others, then that is leading to a good influence, an ability to be of influence, an ability to be, one could say, popular, one could say, to manifest in the world in ways that are acceptable. Then the Buddha goes on to speak about those who are generous or those who are stingy. If there's generosity, if there's giving, if there's open-heartedness, giving away, sharing energy in the field, then the result of this is prosperity, is more of the same, is wealth, is fortunate circumstances materially. If there's stinginess and meanness and holding to and hoarding of materiality, then the result of that is poverty, is a lack, is having to do without, not getting the things that are needed. And finally, if there is curiosity, if there's interest in finding out how things are, why things are, if there's spiritual interest, if there's a search in the heart, then the result of that is wisdom, is insight, is intelligence. If there's no curiosity or questioning or search or seeking to find out the truth of the way things are, then the result of that is stupidity, a lack of intelligence, foolishness, lack of insight. So this sutta is, very interesting in the way it simply lays out these laws of cause and effect. And yet there's a danger if we leave it here that we may fall into wrong view. And the next sutta, Kamma Vibhanga Sutta, the greater exposition on Kamma, which is Majjhima 136, which follows on directly, is a way in which we can deepen our understanding of Kamma and avoid falling into mistaken views. So as I've already touched on, there's a danger if we fall into the misunderstanding of reality, that is, not appreciate anatta, not appreciate the characteristic of all things, that there is no self to be found in the created or the uncreated. There is no self, no selfing to be done here. If we fall into personalizing and particularizing these laws, then we can make the mistake of kind of putting things together in a way that is too simplistic and unskillful, that we may, for instance, see a person who has some kind of a disability or some kind of sickness and feel, having read and taken in, yes, the result, the sickness and ill health, that is the result of violence and harmful intention. Such a person either has been harmful in the past or violent in the past, or in the very life that they're in. If a child is born in a way sickly and disabled, one would say, well, in a past life, they must have been very violent and cruel. And that's why it is the way it is. We can see in many traditions where rebirth is part of the, not necessarily understanding, but one could say belief system in a culture, that we can have these views coming in. This blaming and judging, this brushing aside the misfortunes of others, putting them down to blaming the individual for their own misfortune. This is a completely wrong view and a very harmful view. So we wouldn't want to rest with the Chula Kamma Vibhanga Sutta teachings alone, because of this danger that we all have until we're free from the sense of self to particularize and personalize what we've learned. So coming on to Kamma Vibhanga Sutta, Majjhima 136, the longer analysis of Kamma. Now here, this sutta was prompted by a monk called Samidhi. We can be very grateful to him. And also the wanderer who's called Potaliputta, Potali's son. Potaliputta approaches Samidhi one day, and this wanderer approaches this monk, and he says to him, I've heard that your teacher, the Buddha, says that only thoughts are important, not words or deeds. And Samiti felt quite sure, even though he's quite a young monk at the time, fairly newly ordained, he felt quite sure that this was not correct. And he said, please do not say so. You're misrepresenting the Buddha. Thoughts, words, and deeds all have intentional thoughts, words, and deeds all have results, are all important, are all significant. And they speak a little bit more and about a few other things. But basically, Samidi's a bit troubled by this conversation and he wants clarification. Now, Putaliputra probably was picking up this view from another event when the Buddha was speaking to another wanderer and pointing out to them that it's not only deeds and words that are important in terms of intentionality, but also what we think has significance. When we intentionally think unwholesome thoughts or wholesome thoughts, there is a result, there is a follow through, there is a karmic result, vipaka, from our thoughts as well as our words and our deeds. And so it may be that this teaching of the Buddha became somewhat distorted, and so Putaliputra may well have been genuinely confused and wondering about what are the Buddha's teachings on Kamma. Of course, Kamma was known to not just the Buddha and his disciples at that time. It's a concept that is very prevalent in many other traditions. So this was something many of the spiritual seekers and wanderers of the time of the Buddha who were not his disciples were also familiar with. That karma is the driver of samsara. That intentionality is what makes all of this human experience come to pass. So anyway, they had this conversation and Samiti went to see Ananda and told him all about it. And Ananda said, right, we should go to the Buddha. And so they go to the Buddha and Ananda explains what happened. And in some ways, Samiti gave some limited responses to Putaliputra, which you can read about in the sutta. And so the Buddha chastised him a little and then explained how it is that thoughts, words, and deeds intentionally produced lead to results and how those results play out. So I want to focus on the pertinent parts of this sutta for us for the conversation of today, explaining how Kamma works. What are the laws of Kamma, of cause and effect? So, the Buddha here gives what he calls the great exposition of Kamma. But before he gives this great exposition of Kamma, this great explanation, he gives some examples of how we observe people around us in the world, moving from state to state, from experience to experience, sometimes fortunate, sometimes unfortunate, and what we observe and how this affects us. So he gives 4 examples, friends. He gives the example of a person who is harmful, who is involved in wrongdoing, who either through thought or speech or through their actions. Somebody who kills, who steals, who commits sexual misconduct, somebody who lies, speaks falsely or harshly, or gossips, somebody who has wrong view, somebody who's covetous, somebody who has ill will. In such a case, one can see people who are engaged in manifesting in the world in ways that are harmful, in short. Some can seem to do very well, to prosper, to be very blessed, very fortunate, powerful, influential, wealthy, and so forth. Others who do wrong in the world, we can see that they struggle and suffer. That's two examples of people that we can observe. And the Buddha gives two more examples. He said there are some who do good, who avoid harm, who are gentle and compassionate and kind, and only perform good acts and deeds. Such people, we can see, sometimes have a very good life, very fortunate circumstances, happy, healthy, well, everything blessed around them. And others who do good, who avoid harm of any kind, who live a wholesome life, we can see struggling and suffering and having much misfortune in their circumstances. So the Buddha said there are these four kinds of persons: those who do wrongdoing, who either have a good life or a really difficult life, and those who do good and who either have a really good life or a really difficult life. This we see. The Buddha went on to say that when we observe these things, some may have insight, may even have the divine eye and have the opportunity, the ability to see how these things play out even after death. Even if we don't have the divine eye and we can't see the destination of people after death, we can still observe that these things are the case, that sometimes it seems that karma works very well and goodness has a good result and wrongdoing has an unfortunate result. But at other times we can see that those who do good and live a wholesome life really struggle and suffer. And it doesn't look as if the results of goodness are manifesting in a good way. And others, do good and others do harmful things and have a really wonderful, blessed life. Doesn't seem to make sense in terms of the laws of karma. And we can feel that actually there is no justice in the universe. There is no cause and effect. There are no laws here that are, as in Majjhima 135, that are universal, that are always applicable. And so the Buddha said we can get confused by this. If we look at particular trajectories of particular beings, it is not possible to see the laws of karma playing out in the ways that we would expect. We can be surprised at how it is that good people suffer and struggle in this world, and really wicked and cruel people thrive and prosper in this world. And this can seem to throw a beam in this beautiful exposition of Kamma that we've already heard from the shorter discourse. The Buddha said we have to recognize the great exposition of Kamma, how it actually is. And this is how he explains the way that we can understand Kamma, casting our eye around, looking at the world around us. When we see somebody hurting and harming others, violent, murderous, cruel, somebody who is clearly unskillful in their actions, in their words, and most probably in their thoughts, we can be sure. When we see such a person, we can recognize that their unskillful actions, speech and thoughts here and now will have an unfortunate result. The result will be suffering. It is inevitable. That suffering may manifest immediately, it may manifest later on in their life, or it may manifest in some future life. We have no way of knowing when the unskillful intentionality will produce its painful result. If we see somebody unskillful, cruel, harming others, having a wonderful life, living in a blessed way with all the good fortune, all the advantages, then we can know that those advantages and the good fortune that's being experienced right now is a result of wholesome speech, actions, or thoughts in the past. It is the culmination of goodness that has been done at some point, whether it was recently or whether it was long ago, whether it was in this life or some previous life. There will have been some wholesome intentionality that has led to this fortunate situation. And so we can extrapolate from this, friends, in all the other cases. One who is cruel and unskillful, if they have an unfortunate struggle, suffering in this lifetime, or if with the divine eye we can see that they go to an unfortunate destination after death, we can know it may have been as a result of the way they've behaved in this life, or it could be the result of some other past misdeeds. Any time, going back in time, we can't know what actual unskillful intentionality has produced the unfortunate situation. But we can know that any unskillful thought, word, or deed, intentional thought, word, or deed, will result in suffering at some point in the future. And on the other hand, any good fortune that's being experienced by a good person, a person who is gentle, kind, and compassionate and avoids harm, that good fortune may be a result of their goodness in this moment, or it may result from some previous good acts, good intentions in this lifetime or in previous lifetimes, who knows when. And if a good person has a very difficult time, is struggling and suffering a great deal in this lifetime, we can be sure that some unwholesome karma in the past has resulted in this difficulty. So what we can see from this great exposition of Kamma, friends, is that we cannot know how the workings of Kamma manifest through time. This we cannot perceive, we can't understand, but we can allow ourselves to open to the bigger picture and to recognize that even if in particular cases the laws of karma do not seem to be operating in the way that we would expect, that good people suffer, bad people thrive, even so, we can be sure that in the greater scheme of things, the results are always going to be such that wholesome intentions will always lead to a good result, and our unwholesome intentions will always lead to an unfortunate result. We just cannot see how this unfolds through all these bodies, all these beings everywhere. We can't see how the rivers, the currents, the streams of karma are flowing. This we cannot do. A Buddha can understand this and can rest in this, but for the rest of us, we are not able to grasp, to open, to perceive the bigger picture. But we can appreciate from these teachings that the Buddha is telling us to step away from the personal, step away from the particular, recognize that these laws are absolutely always applicable. They're playing out, and we can't always predict. In fact, we cannot predict, we cannot know how they are going to manifest. And I find that myself, the laws of Kamma, as expounded here by the Buddha, enable a kind of acceptance. When I look around the world with my limited perception, things can seem very unjust. There can be a great sense of wrongness at times. when one can see very harmful, not just individuals, but also even whole nations, attitudes, cultural attitudes, prejudices, and so forth, racism, religious animosities, land grabs, the incredible cruelty that people can mete out on one another because of ideas about the other. All of these dreadful things that one can witness on a daily basis. If we take in the news, it's really hard sometimes to rest easy and to feel that there's any, how to say, overarching principles here, any way in which one can accept or come to terms with the things that seem so wrong, so unjust. And yet we can recognize that we all, as a species, one could say, as letting go of the personal to open to the field of samsara, the field of energy, the field of intentionality that's playing out, we can recognize that there is this universal law that pain and suffering now has come about as a result of unskillful intentionality. And therefore, there is a sense of direction and purpose and a way of dealing with the situation we find ourselves in, coping with it on an emotional, intellectual, psychological level, to recognize that therefore also, if there is good intention, wholesomeness, avoidance of unskillful behavior, words, thoughts, if this is manifesting in the field now, then the result will be a good one. So how do we work with this? Do we focus on the injustices and the get sort of bogged down and maybe even hateful around the cruelties that we may witness around us? Or do we focus on promoting that which will lead to a brighter future? And so we can, in seeing the bigger picture, in taking on board the Buddha's teachings on karma and the universal law of karma, we can find our way to usefully interact with the field around us. And that is to strive to purify our hearts from suffering, friends, to do good, to avoid harm, and to work for liberation. Because in this way, we're contributing the most that we can contribute, that can be contributed from this place into the field, this inexorable field of intentionality with its results. We can bring in the wholesome, bring in the bright, bring in the good, and trust that this is leading to a more fortunate, a more happy result. This much we can do. And let's be very careful when we look around us not to fall into the trap of judging, blaming, particularizing, or personalizing anything we see. Let's not make that mistake. Let's just recognize that we're all victims here, in a sense. We're all prone to, we're all immersed in this field of intentionality. And for every one of us, the work is the same. It is to extricate ourselves from this field. It is to overcome. It is to let go, ultimately, of intentionality. Let go of volition. Firstly for ill, but also for good. Let go of the sense of self. Let go of the holding, the attachment, and release ourselves from this field. This is our work. And the Buddha, from his perspective, could see the whole playing out of Kamma. We're immersed in it until we're fully liberated. But even while we're immersed in this field, we are able to strive to extricate ourselves from this field of suffering. So, friends, I think I'll finish here. Please read the two suttas because I've given a very brief outline of some of the teachings in these suttas. There's more. Thank you for your kind attention. And I'm going to have a look at the chat and see if we can have a conversation on this topic. I really welcome any comments, questions, reflections on this, both simple and also profound and complex topic of Kamma. It is simple, and we can profitably explore and investigate any confusion we may have on this topic of Kamma, because it's a rich field for the development of wisdom and insight. Yes, it can seem complicated, and also it is quite simple. So hi everyone again. Hello to also Gregory, Margaret, Japelson, Madeline, hi, Brian, hello, and Brian's got a great comment here I must share with you. Those who've not seen it, he says, don't just do something, sit there. That is very good. Isn't it the case? We want to stop doing stuff, friends. It doesn't mean we sit like a sort of vegetable or, like an insentient lump of matter. Not at all. That is not what non-action is. What we really want to be able to do is to be insightful around all that is experienced here and to let go of any further participation in the field of suffering. There is no time for that. The life is so short, we just have time to gather and focus and restrain and renounce the world and develop insight, develop wisdom through observing the situation that we're in. That is to feel what we feel, to observe the thoughts, observe the emotions, observe the ideas, the memories, all that plays out for us, and to learn from everything. This is all Dhamma for us. There's no time to promote intentionality. The only wise intention, right intention, is the intention to renounce, to let go, and of course to avoid cruelty and harm. Obviously to do good and avoid harm, but then to let go of intentionality, to observe the playing out of Kamma. And in this way we can keep letting go and keep appreciating the peace, the equanimity, the freedom that is there for us. And with this wisdom, with this equanimity, we can have so much compassion for the endless struggle and suffering for as long as we're enmeshed in the field of Kamma, in the field of becoming, in this momentum in samsara. Thank you, Brian, for your great comment. Don't just do something, sit there. Absolutely, absolutely. Stop. Hi, Niranjan. Hi, Kausa friend. Good to see you. Hi, Sudha. Maria from Nova Scotia. Welcome. Welcome. Namo Buddhaya friend. Welcome. And Niranjan says, once got knowledge of karma, then started Buddha's teaching. Yeah, the Buddha himself understood the laws of Kamma before he became the teacher, and understood how the whole of samsara is operating. And from that place of understanding, he could point out to us the way to kind of chart our course, to move in the right direction, to free ourselves from this field of suffering that is samsara. Yeah. Okay, Sud has a comment. Thank you, Sud. And that is, seeing impermanence and studying Dhamma Is this good karma that leads to better material results in this life, or does it not work that way? That's a great example. Thank you, Sud, of the kind of things that we think and wonder about, and maybe even have views about because of things that we've experienced or that we've seen others experiencing. We don't know. We can't know. What we can know is that seeing impermanence and studying Dhamma, this is a wholesome karma, yes. And therefore, it will lead to a wholesome result. It will lead to insight, to a movement towards freedom, to well-being here and now, and at some point, perhaps also in the future, who knows when. Will it lead to better material results in this life? Who knows? It might and it might not. We may find that we practice well the Dhamma and we are dedicated to liberating our hearts from suffering, but we find ourselves in very difficult circumstances with great poverty perhaps and lack and many other obstacles and challenges. We can be sure that if that is the case, those difficulties are a result of some past unwholesome karma. Who knows what, who knows where, who knows when. That's not for us to focus on, but we can just accept that, yes, some unwholesome karma is playing out. Let me be willing to accept, to be with, to patiently endure, not to blame or judge myself or anyone else for this, but to just appreciate this is the stream of karma, of cause and effect, playing out at this point. What I can do when there is difficulties and challenges is to really shoulder that burden, in the sense that the best way forward is to be accepting, even to be grateful that this challenging circumstance is giving me an opportunity to develop patience, endurance, to keep cultivating the good, knowing that the result will be good. This much is in my hands, this much I can do. If we rail against difficulties and blame and judge ourselves or others, we're just making more suffering. So this is where the understanding of Kamma can really help us. Thank you, Sud, for that springboard and for your comment, your question. I have a question here from the LFH. Hi, LFH. Who says, when karma ripens, how long does it last? Again, a wonderful question that we will often have come up for us. If I'm struggling and suffering with some chronic illness or some difficult life situation, how long is it going to last? How can I know? I can't know. And the question itself is like a resistance to the way it is. It's like a rejection of the way it is. Can I recognize the aversion in that? And can I be willing to let go of that? Can I be willing to let go of the questions? Because these questions are unanswerable. And so we can, as the Buddha was pointing out in the second sutta, Maha Kamma Vibhanga Sutta, he's saying that when we see difficult things happening, we can tend to jump to conclusions. You know, we can tend to, we want to know why, and we want particularities. We want to know why this is happening to me. And this we can never know. We have to step away from the particularities and just open to the fact that there is a bigger picture in which there is always justice. There is always this cause and effect. Suffering always leads to more suffering, and goodness always leads to more brightness, more happiness. This we can know. The rest, the details, impossible to know. So when karma ripens, how long does it last? Who knows? It is not for us to even, in a way, question. In a way, when there's some very fortunate or some very unfortunate experience playing out, we serve ourselves best when we stay present for that experience of pleasant or unpleasant feeling, and just let it be what it is, and don't even Or we will ask the question, how long will it last? But don't give much energy or attention to that. That's like a railing against reality. That's like an argument with the way things are. Let's not go there. Let's just be present for this. And this quality of patience can start to come in for us. This beautiful quality of kanti, this virtue of patience, where we're not even thinking about when it will end. We're not waiting for it to end. We're not trying to get there. We're just present for what is. This quality is a great power for us in our practice, friends. So to develop patience is to be willing to be present and to not think ahead, to not go, not to move into the future, and not to speculate about that future. No future. Thank you, the LFH. And okay, we've got a comment here, question from Sud. Thank you, Sud. Is mindfulness of the present moment, sati sampajanya, is that good karma too? Oh, that is good karma. The Buddha repeatedly pointed out that when we're mindful, when we're present, in other cases he spoke about when we're practicing anapanasati, awareness of the breath, when we are meditating, we are creating enormously good karma. It is more wholesome to meditate, to stop, to just sit, and to develop insight through present moment awareness, sati sampajanya. This is the most wholesome thing that we can do. It's more wholesome than going out giving gifts, doing good, striving and serving for ourselves or for others in the world. This is the most wholesome use of our time to develop the heart, to cultivate the letting go, cultivate wisdom, cultivate path. This is the best karma that can be created because it is the karma that leads to freedom from suffering. And so this is, let's recognize the best use of our time. That is letting go of doing, letting go of intentionality, letting go of volition, being present and allowing the Dhamma to unfold, to inform us, allowing our hearts to free up from suffering. So, yes, mindfulness of the present moment, sati sampajanya, is indeed good karma. Not personal, just as our good deeds are not personal. We don't do good deeds, friends, if we're wise, or meditate in order to get something for this one, to have a happy this one. This is not the understanding of karma that we're cultivating here. We do good, we meditate, we develop the path because it brings well-being, it brings happiness, it brings brightness into the field. It brightens. That is the reason to do good, not for personal reasons, but because we recognize there is no personal. No, but there is cause and effect. There is intentionality. Let's align ourselves with that which brightens and eases suffering and leads towards freedom. Thank you, Sud. And just 1 minute to go, friends. I'm going to try and go through, if I can, to meet all your wonderful comments. I'm noting the comments that are not questions also, and thank you for those. Rebecca says, it always feels bad to try and have opinions about others' situations. It feels better to have compassion and see in myself the same unwholesome tendencies to clean up. Absolutely. Well said, Rebecca. Sadhu. This is really crucial and a natural result of understanding of Kamma, to see that, to have an opinion about what we see over there playing out in our limited perception of what's happening is such a waste of our time and energy, and so imbued with so much ignorance. It's bound to be, because we can only see so much, we can only perceive so much. This is not the way to spend our precious lives. It is fruitless, and it is often tinged with ignorance, tinged with error, you know. So not to judge others in any way, not to blame others for anything, but rather to feel what we feel, be present for what's happening here. This is the best use of our time. So thank you for this comment. And also, compassion is the natural result of insight, is it not, friends? When we see things clearly, how could we not have compassion? If we see or appear to be viewing, if we perceive others creating suffering, who would want to do that? Who would want to harm? Who would want to do unwholesome things? If we knew the result, then we would shy away and avoid at all costs any kind of harm in this world, through this body, through speech, through action, through thought. Who would want to go there? It's like, why would I want to burn? Why would I want to suffer? So when we see others in this way, doing and speaking and acting in ways that are harmful, how could we not feel compassion for that additional suffering in the world, that, you know, extra heat, extra stress, agitation? That is something that we can only feel compassion around, and to, of course, motivate. We're motivated to work here to reduce and relieve any heat, any struggle, any harmful intentionality. And so we would wish for, wherever we see this around us, that the same work can be done. And anything we can do to help in that work, well, we'll do that. Oftentimes it's the wisest use of our time is to focus on this one and to make peace here. But from that place of peacefulness and insight, we can often have a good influence on the world around us. So yeah, no judgment, no blaming, and no opinions. No opinions. How can we have opinions about others when we're floundering around ourselves in the dark? Let's just focus on the practice and come out of the darkness, come to the light. Yeah, the light of wisdom. Thank you, Rebecca. Thanks, Heike, for your kind words. Hi, Diane. Thank you. SF Universe, hello. And oh dear, I'm going to have to, not oh dear, but I have a time pressure. So I'm going to go through fairly quickly with Madeline's comment to share. Thanks, Madeline. I love the sort of the conch trumpet. Here's a reference, friends. SN Samyutta Nikaya 42.8 discusses how practicing the Brahmaviharas helps mitigate any harmful karma we might have made. Wonderful. Let's read this one, friends. I should be reading it myself. I think I know this one. It's a beautiful sutta. The conch trumpet. Yes, yes. So Samyutta 42.8. Wonderful. And okay, this is a discipline for me now to answer this quickly. Christopher, thanks, Christopher. Are Buddhas subject to Kamma Vipaka? No, the Buddha is no longer subject to the laws of Kamma, because there is no longer any intentionality. There is no longer any results of intentionality. That is the case also for the Arahants. That is a question that really deserves an entire talk. Unfortunately, friends, I'm not going to be giving any talks or Dhamma teachings for a while. But when I do return, whenever that is, then I will take this up. Thank you, Christopher. Yeah. Gregory says, people from unfortunate backgrounds often have cultural, environmental, and genetic influences that tend to encourage bad karma. How do individuals break out of this cycle of bad karma? What a great question. And Gregory goes on to say, for example, if one isn't exposed to the teachings of the Buddha, they may have the wrong view that revenge is beneficial. How do they get right view? Thank you, Gregory. Isn't this so, friends? We see how difficult it is for beings to extricate themselves from situations of great suffering. And when you look at the history of certain nations in the world, we can see that there are large numbers of people who are bound up with identities that are steeped in suffering, steeped in hatred of the other, seeking revenge and justice, and we can get, we can view situations that seem so unjust and so hateful and so embroiled. And we can also start to feel ourselves getting emotionally agitated around these things. It is very painful to witness, to observe the playing out of Kamma when it's very intense and extreme. And there are so many situations in the world that are really hot, boiling, very strong emotion, very strong energies of intentionality for harm. And more suffering, therefore, is resulting. And this is just very difficult to meet and maintain equanimity. But I would say that we are practicing wisely if we bring in these teachings on Kamma and recognize that all beings, one would say in this limited way, all beings are the owners of their Kamma. I think we need to broaden that and say, Kamma plays out inexorably. So unwholesome, unskillful, painful thoughts, words, and deeds result in more suffering. And just to see that and to see how extreme it can be at times in the ways that this manifests in the world, let us not shy away from these things. Open our hearts to the Dhamma here and see how the compassion arises, see how the wisdom arises, and the prompt, the urgency, the spur that we can feel to wish to free ourselves and all beings from this kind of suffering, to let go of the intentionals, let go of intentional harm, let go of intentional goodness. Step away from the personal, open to the wider field. Practice for liberation, friends. It's the only way forward and the only way to really, truly alleviate this extreme suffering. Yeah, thank you very much, Gregory. That's a very profound question. And it really speaks to our humanity. We feel very affected by one another and by the things that are going on in the world around us. But let us face up to the dukkha that's there and apply the Buddha's teachings to come out of that suffering. And in this way, we can benefit all beings everywhere. It's a brightening and a lightening. This we can offer. Yeah, thank you, Gregory. And friends, we must conclude. Thank you also, Anand. Thank you for all your kind comments. Any people I've not mentioned. And really appreciate this interaction. As I mentioned, I won't be teaching for a little while. And so I would like to take this opportunity to wish you every blessing in your practice, friends. Until next we meet, let's pay homage to our teacher, the Buddha, with 3 heartfelt sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.